Chapter 1. The night she broke every law of her people. The Velari had a word for nights like this. It did not translate cleanly into human languages. Closest approximations included the silence before extinction or the cold that remembers you. It described the moment when survival narrowed to a single breath, a single decision, a single irreversible act. Cythera lived inside that word now. Snow lashed sideways through the abandoned district, driven by wind that screamed through the skeletal remains of half-finished buildings. The city beyond still lived. Lights burned, transport lanes hummed, people laughed somewhere behind sealed walls. But here, on the forgotten edge of human civilization, the world had thinned to concrete, ice, and endurance. Her boots slipped on frozen pavement. She caught herself against a rusted railing, claws scraping metal, breath tearing from her chest in a harsh, broken sound. Pain flared up her legs, sharp and insistent, but she ignored it. Pain was familiar. Pain was manageable. Fear was not. The bundle strapped to her chest shifted weakly. Cythera froze instantly, every instinct screaming to attention. She angled her body away from the wind, curling inward, shielding the small shape beneath layers of fabric and her own failing warmth. "Hush," she whispered in Velari, her voice barely audible over the storm. "I am here." The infant did not cry. That terrified her more than anything else. Velari infants were vocal by nature. They communicated need with sound and light, their bioluminescent skin pulsing brighter when distressed. Silence meant exhaustion. Silence meant the body was conserving energy because it no longer believed relief was coming. Cythera pressed a trembling hand against the child's back. Too cold. Her stomach twisted violently. She had counted the doors. She had not wanted to, but training had forced her to. Counting was grounding. Counting made panic obey structure. This was the 7th door, 7 attempts to survive. 7 human households where light burned behind glass and warmth existed just out of reach. At the first, she had knocked and waited until her arms shook. No answer. At the second, the door had opened just long enough for a woman to see blue skin and recoil, eyes wide with fear, before slamming it shut. At the third, someone had shouted. At the fourth, a security drone had rounded the corner before she could even raise her hand. At the fifth, a man had stared at her child for too long. She did not remember running from the sixth. Only that she had not stopped until her lungs felt like they were tearing apart from the inside. Now she stood before the 7th. A modest human house, old construction, detached. The kind built before cities grew upward instead of outward. One light burned in the front room, yellow, warm. Someone was awake. Cythera swayed again, vision blurring at the edges. She tightened the sling instinctively, pressing the child closer, trying to give warmth she no longer possessed. She had once been a navigator, a senior star path adept aboard the Velari exploration cruiser Ashen Dawn. She had charted gravitational anomalies, blind, guided vessels through collapsing hyperspace corridors, calculated jump windows while under fire. She had been strong. Now she could barely lift her hand. Velari law was clear. A mother did not beg. A mother did not abandon. A mother protected even unto death. But Velari law had been written on a world that still existed. Her homeworld did not. Cythera raised her hand. It hovered inches from the door. Her fingers curled, uncurled. Her mind flooded with memories she did not have time for. Sunlight refracting through crystalline towers, the harmonic hum of Velari cities. the deep communal warmth of extended kinships where children passed freely between arms. A civilization that had believed it would last forever. Her child shifted again, a tiny sound escaping her throat, more breath than cry. That was enough. Cythera knocked, once, twice, 3 times. The sound echoed far too loudly in the storm. Her instincts screamed at her to run. Instead, she knelt. The snow soaked instantly through her trousers, biting into skin already numb. She lowered the child carefully, hands gentle despite their shaking, arranging the blanket so the wind would strike fabric instead of flesh. She adjusted the sling around the infant one last time, fingers lingering, memorizing weight, warmth, presence. She pressed her forehead against the child's. "I am sorry," she whispered in Velari, voice cracking. "I tried." The infant's skin pulsed faintly, a weak glow answering her voice. Cythera swallowed a sound that threatened to tear free of her chest. Then, against every instinct, every law, every sacred truth of her people, she stood and stepped back. The door handle turned. Jonah Mercer had already decided not to open it. He stood in the narrow kitchen of his house, staring at a half-finished cup of coffee that had gone cold in his hands. The storm rattled the windows hard enough to make the frames groan, and the city beyond seemed muted, distant, unreal. He hated nights like this. Storms had a way of dragging memories up from places he preferred to keep sealed. They reminded him how small individual lives really were, how easily everything could be erased without warning. The knock cut through the noise like a blade. Jonah stiffened. No one knocked at this hour. Not here. Not during a storm severe enough to ground air traffic and shut down half the transit system. He stayed where he was, heart beating just a little faster, mind already cataloging reasons not to get involved. It was probably nothing. Someone lost. Someone drunk. Someone looking for trouble. He took a sip of coffee and winced at the bitterness. Then he heard it. A sound threaded beneath the wind, fragile and thin. A cry, not loud, not demanding. Wrong. Jonah set the mug down slowly. Every instinct he had spent years cultivating told him to stay put, to call authorities, to let someone else handle it. His feet moved anyway. The cold slammed into him the moment he opened the door, stealing breath and heat in one brutal rush. Snow swirled across the porch, stinging his face, obscuring everything beyond a few feet. For a heartbeat he saw nothing. Then his gaze dropped. The world tilted. A child lay on his doorstep, small, wrapped in thin fabric already dusted white with snow. Skin an unmistakable shade of deep blue, faintly luminous beneath the porch light. Tiny fingers curled weakly against her chest. Alien, Jonah's thoughts scattered. "Oh no," he breathed. He dropped to his knees without conscious decision, shrugging out of his jacket as he reached for the infant. The moment he lifted her, shock rippled through him. She was freezing. Her weight was wrong, too light, alarmingly so. As Jonah pressed her against his chest, wrapping the jacket around both of them, the infant's body relaxed. A soft sound escaped her, relief, not distress. Golden eyes fluttered open, unfocused but searching. Jonah swallowed hard. "Hey," he whispered, voice breaking despite himself. "Hey, I've got you." Something moved at the edge of his vision. He looked up. A figure stood just beyond the porch light, half lost in swirling snow. Tall, thin, female, alien. She stood perfectly still, like a hunted animal deciding whether to flee or fight. Dark hair plastered to her face, skin dull with exhaustion. Her eyes, golden, wide, terrified, were locked on the child in his arms. Understanding hit Jonah with brutal clarity. She hadn't abandoned the child, she had delivered her. "She's alive," Jonah said quickly, raising one hand, keeping his voice low and steady. "She's okay." The alien woman swayed, her knees buckled. Jonah barely had time to react before she collapsed forward. He lunged, shifting the infant to one arm and catching the woman with the other. She was shockingly light, all sharp bone and trembling muscle. He swore under his breath. "All right," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "All right, that's enough of this." He hauled her inside, kicking the door shut behind them with his foot, sealing out the storm. The house felt impossibly warm by comparison. The woman sagged against him, unconscious, breath shallow but steady. The infant stirred again, pressing closer to Jonah's chest, her faint glow strengthening by a fraction. Jonah stood there for a long moment, heart pounding, staring down at two lives that had just crashed into his quiet, carefully contained existence. He had no plan, no idea what he was doing. Only one certainty settled into place with undeniable weight. There was no closing this door again. Chapter 2. What survives in warmth? The first thing Cythera felt was heat. Not the harsh, artificial warmth of emergency shelters or ship corridors. Those had always been calculated, controlled, impersonal. This warmth was uneven, alive. It carried weight and memory, settling into muscle and bone like something that wanted her to stay. Her second sensation was fear. She woke sharply, breath tearing into her lungs as her body jolted into alertness. Pain flared everywhere at once, legs, back, shoulders, each nerve screaming protest as consciousness returned. Her eyes flew open. A ceiling, human construction, off-white, faintly cracked with the subtle discoloration of age and use. Light spilled across it in a soft, golden hue. She was inside. Her heart slammed violently against her ribs. Cythera pushed herself upright, ignoring the dizziness that immediately threatened to drag her back down. Her gaze swept the room in rapid, trained assessment. Small, enclosed, no visible weapons. One door, one window partially covered by thick curtains. A human couch beneath her, old but clean, a blanket draped loosely over her legs, and her child. The infant lay beside her, bundled in layers far thicker than anything Cythera had owned. The baby's chest rose and fell steadily. Her skin glowed faintly, stronger than it had in days. The tiny lines of strain around her eyes had softened, alive, warm. Cythera's breath broke free in a sound halfway between a sob and a laugh. She gathered the child into her arms, holding her close, pressing her face into the soft fabric, inhaling deeply. "You're here," she whispered. "You're still here." The infant stirred, releasing a quiet sound of contentment, one small hand curling instinctively against her mother's chest. Cythera trembled. She had been so close, so impossibly close to losing everything. A sound came from the adjacent room, footsteps. Her muscles tensed instantly, old reflexes snapping into place. She shifted her body subtly, angling herself between the door and her child, scanning for improvised weapons, anything she could use if she had to fight. The footsteps slowed, then stopped. A human voice followed, calm but cautious. "You're awake." Cythera's gaze snapped to the doorway. The man stood there, hands visible, posture deliberately relaxed. He looked tired, not weak, just worn in a way that suggested years of responsibility rather than recent hunger. Dark hair, faint lines around his eyes, clothes practical and unremarkable. No uniform, no badge, Jonah Mercer. He hadn't given his name before. Somehow Cythera knew it anyway. She didn't answer. Jonah nodded slowly as if he'd expected that. "I'm not coming any closer," he said. "Just wanted to make sure you were all right." Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions. Finally, Cythera spoke, her voice hoarse but steady. "My child." "She's fine," Jonah replied immediately. "Cold but improving. I got her warmed up before you passed out." Cythera studied him intently, searching for deception. Velari were not naive. Survival had sharpened their instincts to a razor's edge, but she sensed no malice, no calculation, only restraint. "You could have taken her," Cythera said quietly. Jonah's brow furrowed. "Taken her? Yes," she said. "Left me outside, called authorities, sold information. Humans have done all of those things." He inhaled slowly, then exhaled through his nose. "I know." That answer unsettled her more than denial would have. "Why didn't you?" she asked. Jonah hesitated. He leaned lightly against the doorframe, gaze drifting briefly to the sleeping child in her arms. "Because she needed you," he said simply. "And you needed help." Cythera's grip tightened around her child. Humans were not supposed to be this simple. Her people had studied humanity extensively during the war. Emotional volatility, aggressive adaptability, a tendency toward tribal loyalty and sudden escalation. They were dangerous, but no model had predicted this. Jonah gestured toward the kitchen behind him. "I've got food heating up, soup, nothing fancy, but it's warm." Cythera swallowed. Hunger surged now that safety had been established, sharp and insistent. Her pride flared automatically, then faded. She nodded once. Jonah turned away without comment, giving her time. That, more than anything, eased the tight coil in her chest. The soup smelled overwhelming. Simple ingredients: salt, fat, heat. Cythera ate slowly at first, wary of her body's response. Starvation had taught her caution. Too much too quickly could kill. Jonah watched discreetly from across the small table, pretending to focus on his own meal while tracking every sign of distress. When she didn't falter, didn't stop, didn't push the bowl away, he relaxed by degrees. Her child fed next. Velari infants required direct nourishment, intimate, ritualized, sacred. Cythera hesitated, shoulders curling inward slightly as awareness of her surroundings returned. Jonah noticed instantly. "I can step out," he said, already rising. She looked up, surprised. "You would give privacy?" she asked. He paused. "Yeah, of course." Velari culture treated such acts with profound reverence. Exposure was vulnerability, trust. Cythera inclined her head. "Thank you." Jonah retreated down the hall, footsteps soft, door closing gently behind him. Alone again, Cythera fed her child, murmuring ancient Velari words under her breath. Songs passed through generations, meant to anchor infants to safety, to belonging. The baby's glow brightened steadily. By the time Jonah returned, the child slept deeply, curled against her mother's chest. Cythera felt heavier, not with fear, with exhaustion. Jonah noticed. "There's a spare room," he said. "Bed's not great, but it's better than the couch." She hesitated. Sleep had become dangerous for her. Vulnerability invited death. But her body betrayed her resolve, sagging slightly under the weight of fatigue. She nodded. Cythera dreamed, not of war, not of burning skies or collapsing worlds. She dreamed of standing still. When she woke, pale morning light filtered through the curtains. For a moment she didn't remember where she was, and panic surged. Then she heard breathing, soft, steady. Her child slept peacefully beside her. Outside the room, something sizzled gently. Cooking, human sounds, domestic. Ordinary, her chest tightened painfully. She rose quietly, careful not to wake the infant, and moved toward the doorway. Jonah stood in the kitchen, stirring something on the stove, his back to her. The scent of food filled the space again. You don't have to keep doing this, she said quietly. Jonah glanced over his shoulder. Doing what? Helping us, she said. You have already done more than most. He turned fully now, expression serious. That's not how I see it. How do you see it? Jonah considered the question. I see two people who showed up at my door because they had nowhere else to go. Cythera studied him closely. Humans do not usually take risks for strangers. Jonah gave a small, humorless smile. We don't usually think we are, that's the problem. Silence stretched. Then Jonah spoke again, quieter. Someone's going to notice eventually. Cythera's muscles tightened. I know. They'll ask questions, he continued. And if they find you, they will take my child, Cythera finished flatly. Jonah nodded once. Yeah, the reality settled between them like a physical weight. Cythera met his gaze. You should send us away. Jonah didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached into a cabinet and set another bowl on the counter. Eat first, he said. We'll talk after. Cythera understood then. This human did not deny danger. He simply refused to let it dictate his choices. And somewhere deep inside her, something long dormant stirred, an emotion she had not allowed herself since before the war. Hope. Chapter 3. When humans decide to stand, the first sign that their time was running out came quietly. Cythera noticed it before Jonah did. It was the absence of sound. The neighborhood had a rhythm, muted traffic in the distance, the occasional hiss of a transport lane activating, voices bleeding faintly through walls when humans argued or laughed too loudly. Even during the storm, there had been a background hum of life. Now there was nothing. Cythera stood near the window, curtain drawn just enough to see the street without exposing herself. Her posture was rigid, shoulders squared, body angled instinctively between the glass and the room behind her. Jonah watched her from the kitchen doorway. You hear it too, he said quietly. She nodded once. The quiet is wrong, Jonah exhaled slowly. That usually means someone's watching. Her golden eyes flicked to him. You are familiar with this. More than I'd like, he replied. He crossed the room and joined her at the window, careful to stay out of sight. The street looked ordinary, snow piled along curbs, lights flickering lazily, nothing visibly out of place. But Jonah knew better. There's a camera on the corner, he said under his breath. City installed. Normally it sweeps every 12 seconds. Cythera waited. It hasn't moved, Jonah finished. The silence deepened. Behind them, the infant stirred softly, releasing a sleepy sound that cut through the tension like a blade. Cythera turned instantly, scooping her child up, murmuring reassurance in Velari. The baby settled again, glow pulsing faintly against her mother's chest. They will come, Cythera said. Jonah didn't argue. Yeah, she studied him closely. You should let us go now, before they associate you with us. Jonah leaned against the counter, arms crossing loosely, not defensive but resolute. That's already happened, her brow furrowed. How can you be certain? Jonah gestured vaguely toward the window. Because they don't waste surveillance on maybes. Cythera closed her eyes briefly. She had known this moment would come. Every refuge collapsed eventually. Every place of rest became a trap if occupied too long. She had hoped, foolishly, that perhaps this human would be different enough to change that rule. Instead, he had simply delayed it, which was more than anyone else had done. I will leave, she said. Alone if necessary, Jonah's jaw tightened. No, her eyes snapped open. No, you leave with me, he corrected. Or not at all, Cythera stared at him. You owe us nothing. I know, Jonah said evenly. That's why this is my choice. For a long moment neither spoke. Then Cythera said quietly, do you understand what will happen to you if they discover you helped us? Jonah nodded. Yeah, They will seize your property, probably. They will restrict your movement. Likely. They may imprison you. Jonah met her gaze steadily, still not changing my answer. Something inside Cythera fractured. Velari culture valued collective survival over individual sacrifice. One life did not outweigh the many. Yet here was a human, an unaffiliated civilian, willing to gamble everything on two strangers. It was illogical. It was reckless. It was deeply Velari in a way her people had forgotten how to be. Jonah moved toward the back room, already thinking ahead. "Pack light," he said. "Only what you can carry." Cythera hesitated. "Where will we go?" Jonah paused, hand on the doorframe. "Somewhere they don't expect." They left before dusk. Jonah chose routes that avoided main streets, leading them through maintenance corridors, abandoned service tunnels, and forgotten pedestrian paths built during earlier expansion phases. Cythera followed closely, her movements precise despite fatigue, eyes scanning constantly for threats. She moved like a soldier. Jonah noticed. "You were trained," he said quietly as they descended a narrow stairwell. "Yes," Cythera replied. "Navigator Corps. Command," she nodded. "Once." He absorbed that in silence. When they surfaced again, the city had shifted. Dusk painted everything in gray and amber, shadows stretching long and deceptive. Jonah led them toward the industrial sector, where warehouses loomed like silent sentinels and civilian presence thinned to almost nothing. Cythera slowed. "This area is monitored," Jonah nodded. "Which is why they won't expect us to pass through it on foot." They reached an old freight depot, long since decommissioned. Rust ate at its edges, warning signs peeling and half buried under snow. Jonah keyed in a sequence on a battered panel near the side entrance. The door slid open with a tired groan. Inside, warmth greeted them, faint but real. Cythera blinked in surprise. "You prepared this?" Jonah shrugged. "Not for this, but I like having options." The space was sparse but functional. Supplies stacked neatly. Emergency rations, medical kits, blankets. A small generator hummed softly in the corner. "You expected to run," Cythera observed. Jonah met her gaze. "I live in a system that likes control." She understood that all too well. They settled quickly. Cythera fed the child while Jonah monitored external sensors on a cracked display. His jaw tightened as data streamed in. "They're sweeping the neighborhood," he said. "Slow, methodical." Cythera's fingers curled around the infant. "They will widen the net," Jonah nodded, "which is why we don't stay." He turned to her. "There's a transport leaving in 48 hours. Her eyes widened slightly. "Civilian, cargo," Jonah replied. "Outer settlements, mixed crew, minimal oversight." "Enough to disappear," she murmured. "Exactly." The baby stirred, letting out a soft, contented sound. Jonah glanced down, something unreadable flickering across his face. "She's quieter now." "She feels safe," Cythera said. Jonah swallowed. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the hum of the generator and the distant, muted city beyond the walls. Then Cythera spoke. "Among my people," she said slowly, "there is a warning passed to children. Beware the species that adopts what it should ignore." Jonah raised an eyebrow. "Sounds ominous." "It was meant to be," she said. "We believed compassion weakened civilizations, that mercy invited exploitation." "And now?" Jonah asked. Cythera looked at him, really looked at him. "Now," she said quietly, "I believe you survived because you refused to forget it." Jonah didn't respond. But somewhere deep within the structures of human governance, alarms were beginning to trigger. Files were being cross-referenced, patterns identified, a conclusion forming slowly, uneasily. A human had interfered. And history had taught them one dangerous truth: when humans interfered, outcomes became unpredictable. Chapter 4: The Cost of Not Looking Away. The system noticed Jonah Mercer at 04:12 local time. It did not do so dramatically. There were no alarms, no flashing alerts, no urgent calls transmitted across networks. Bureaucracies rarely announced their attention. They simply adjusted parameters: a flagged residence, a missing subject, a pattern of movement inconsistent with baseline civilian behavior. The conclusion was not immediate, but it was inevitable. Jonah Mercer had become an anomaly. The freight depot was quiet in the way only places forgotten by planners ever were. The generator hummed steadily, its sound softened by distance and thick walls. Cythera sat cross-legged on a folded blanket, her daughter asleep against her chest, small fingers clutching fabric with instinctive trust. Jonah watched the external feeds from a terminal mounted near the far wall. "They've tightened the grid," he said quietly. Cythera did not look up. "How far?" "3 blocks," Jonah replied. "Expanding in concentric sweeps. They're being careful." She exhaled slowly. "They believe I am alone." "Not anymore," Jonah said, her gaze lifted then, golden eyes sharp and assessing. "You are certain you will continue?" Jonah met her stare without flinching. "I've already crossed the line, might as well finish crossing it." She studied him in silence. Among the Velari, defiance was strategic, measured, justified, weighed against collective survival. Jonah's defiance was different. It was not rooted in ideology or rebellion. It was personal. That frightened her more than weapons ever had. The knock came just after dawn, not at the depot door but at Jonah's house. Cythera sensed it immediately. Her spine straightened, every muscle locking into readiness. She felt it through the floor, through the air itself, a shift in pressure, in intent. "They are there," she said. Jonah stiffened. "At the house," she nodded. 3, no 4. Jonah swore softly. "They're faster than I thought." He brought up the feed from a municipal camera 2 streets away. Figures stood on his porch, dark coats, neutral posture, faces carefully blank. One held a data tablet. Another scanned the surroundings with slow, deliberate movements. "They're not kicking the door in," Jonah muttered. "Yet." Cythera adjusted her grip on her child. "They will attempt persuasion first." "Yeah," Jonah said. "They always do." Agent Lorne did not like human anomalies. He had built his career on predictability, understanding how people moved, where fear applied pressure, which incentives produced compliance. Most civilians followed patterns as reliably as gravity. Jonah Mercer had not. "Confirm timeline," Lorne said calmly. His assistant glanced at the tablet. "Subject last observed 42 hours ago. Residents inactive since then. No power draw spikes. No outgoing communications." "Which means," Lorne replied, "he planned this." Lorne stepped closer to the door and knocked once. "Firm, professional, Jonah Mercer," he called. "This is a routine inquiry. Please open the door." Silence answered. Lorne exhaled through his nose. "He's not here." "Should we force entry?" the assistant asked. Lorne shook his head. "Not yet. This isn't about arrest. It's about message discipline." He straightened. "Begin asset tracing, financials, transit access, social ties." The assistant hesitated. "Sir, he doesn't have many." Lorne's eyes narrowed. "Then he'll be easier to pressure." In the depot, Jonah felt the tension spike. "They're going to trace me," he said. "Accounts, IDs, movement history." Cythera nodded. "Then time has narrowed." Jonah turned to her. "We move tonight." Her eyes flicked toward the child. "She is stronger than before, but still vulnerable." "I know," Jonah said, "which is why we don't wait." He hesitated, then added, "There's something you should know." Cythera looked at him expectantly. "If this goes wrong," Jonah continued, "they won't just take you." She tilted her head. "Explain." "They'll make an example," Jonah said quietly. "Not publicly, quietly, so no one else gets ideas." Cythera absorbed that. "Then you should not be here." Jonah smiled faintly. "Too late." She studied his expression, the calm resolve, the absence of bravado. This was not a hero seeking glory. This was a human who had decided something mattered more than safety. That, Cythera realized, was why humans were terrifying. They moved at dusk. The city was restless now. Patrols increased. Drones traced tighter arcs overhead. Data flowed faster, systems talking to systems, suspicion spreading like a living thing. Jonah guided them through the underlevels, avoiding main access points, using service tunnels long since decommissioned. Cythera followed with silent efficiency, her child secured close, her awareness stretched outward like a net. Halfway through a transit corridor, she stopped abruptly. Jonah froze instantly. "What is it?" "Listening device," she whispered, pointing to a conduit above them. "Recently placed." Jonah's jaw tightened. "They're herding," Cythera nodded. "Toward known exits." Jonah considered. "Then we don't use an exit." He turned sharply, leading them down a narrow maintenance shaft barely wide enough to crawl through. Cythera hesitated only a second before following. The cargo port loomed ahead, vast, industrial, buzzing with activity. Automated loaders moved massive containers with mechanical precision. Crews shouted over engine noise. The smell of fuel and ozone filled the air. Jonah scanned the area quickly. "Dock 17, that's our ship." Cythera's gaze darted across the crowd. "Too many eyes." "Which means fewer questions," Jonah replied. They moved with the flow, blending into chaos. Cythera lowered her head, keeping the child's glow hidden beneath layered fabric. Jonah kept his posture loose, unremarkable. Halfway across the loading platform, Jonah felt it. That prickling sensation at the base of his neck. He glanced back. A drone hovered above the far gantry, sensors swiveling. "Move," he murmured. They accelerated, not running, not panicking, just fast enough to matter. The drone's light flared. Cythera felt it too, systems locking on, algorithms comparing silhouettes, thermal signatures aligning. Jonah grabbed her hand. "Now," he said. They broke into a sprint. Shouts erupted behind them. "Stop! Unauthorized access!" The drone descended rapidly. Cythera twisted mid-run, extending her free hand. Her fingers traced a precise pattern in the air, a relic of Velari military training. The drone's sensors flickered violently, confused by a sudden burst of electromagnetic interference. It crashed into a container wall, sparks flying. Jonah stared at her for half a second. "Remind me never to underestimate you." She didn't answer. She was already running again. They reached the ship as the loading ramp began to rise. Jonah vaulted aboard first, turning to pull Cythera up just as security personnel flooded the platform. A voice echoed through the port. "Halt! That ship is under inspection." The ramp sealed. Engines roared to life. Inside the ship, chaos reigned as the pilot shouted for clearance. Jonah slammed the hatch controls. "Go now!" The ship lurched violently. Cythera clutched her child, bracing instinctively as gravity shifted. Then lift off. The ground fell away. The port shrank beneath them. They had escaped. In a control room miles away, Agent Lorne watched the feed cut out. Silence followed. He removed his glasses slowly, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "A civilian," he murmured. "One civilian." His assistant shifted uneasily. "Sir, command wants to know how this happened." Lorne straightened, jaw tightening. "Because," he said carefully, "we forgot something." "What's that?" Lorne looked at the darkened screen. "Humans don't need permission to care." Chapter 5. What the galaxy learned too late. The ship did not slow until the stars blurred. Jonah felt the acceleration press him into the bulkhead, breath forced from his lungs as the cargo vessel punched through atmosphere and into open space. Warning lights flared briefly, then stabilized. The low hum of engines settled into a steady rhythm, deep, powerful, relentless. They were gone. For several seconds, no one spoke. Cythera remained seated on the deck where Jonah had pulled her down, her body curved protectively around her child. The infant stirred, then released a small sound, curious, not afraid. Her glow pulsed brighter than Jonah had ever seen it. Alive, thriving. Jonah let out a long, shaking breath he hadn't realized he was holding and laughed once short, incredulous. "We did it," he muttered. Cythera lifted her head slowly, golden eyes scanning the interior of the ship, the unfamiliar crew, the sealed hatch behind them. Only when she felt the steady vibration of sustained flight did the truth settle in. They had escaped. Her shoulders sagged as weeks, no, months, of tension bled out of her body all at once. She pressed her forehead against her child's crown, a sound breaking free of her chest that Velari language had never needed a word for. Jonah watched her quietly. He had seen victory before, seen relief. He had never seen anything like this. The outer settlements did not resemble Earth. That was their greatest strength. The colony world of Kethries orbited a pale orange star, its surface stitched together by small, independent settlements rather than centralized megacities. Humans, Velari, and half a dozen other species lived side by side, not because they trusted each other, but because none of them had the power to dominate. It was messy. It was inefficient. It was free. When the ship touched down, no one demanded papers. No one scanned Cythera's child. No one asked Jonah why he had abandoned his registered residence without notice. They asked only one question. "Can you work?" Jonah answered yes. Cythera answered yes. That was enough. Months passed, slowly at first, carefully. Cythera's health returned in stages, color deepening in her skin, strength rebuilding in her limbs, the sharp edge of constant fear dulling into something survivable. She took work mapping local trade routes, then advising on navigation algorithms when word spread of her past experience. Jonah worked cargo logistics, then maintenance, then coordination. He discovered, to his mild surprise, that he was good at building systems that kept people moving without breaking them. Their child, Eris, Cythera named her, grew faster than Velari projections predicted. "She is adapting," Cythera said one evening, watching Eris crawl across the floor with startling determination. "To what?" Jonah asked. "To safety," Cythera replied. Jonah smiled faintly. The galaxy noticed. It always did. At first, it was just a footnote, an internal report buried under trade disputes and minor border conflicts. A Velari refugee sighted beyond expected migration zones. A human civilian missing from registry with no confirmed death. Then patterns emerged. Other Velari began appearing on Kethries, then on neighboring worlds, always with humans nearby, always under similar circumstances, doors open, transports shared, resources quietly redistributed, no formal movements, no manifestos, no leaders to arrest, just individuals making the same decision again and again. Human governments noticed next. Briefings grew tense. Words like containment, precedent, and policy erosion appeared more frequently in classified discussions. Analysts warned of sympathy corridors forming along human trade routes, unofficial networks that moved refugees faster than laws could track. Someone finally asked the wrong question. How do we stop this? The answer came back colder than expected. You can't. Agent Lorne stood before the council chamber, hands folded behind his back, listening as projections flickered across the room. Incidents, statistics, models, all pointing to the same conclusion. Human involvement is the common variable, one analyst said. Remove it and refugee movement drops by 70%. Lorne spoke before anyone else could. You can't remove it. The room fell silent. A council member frowned. Explain, Lorne straightened. This isn't an organization, it's not coordinated. You can't decapitate it, infiltrate it, or legislate it out of existence. Then what is it? Someone demanded. Lorne met their gaze evenly. It's a cultural reflex. Discomfort rippled through the chamber. Humans, Lorne continued, do not view compassion as a finite resource. They escalate it when challenged. The more pressure you apply, the more resistance you create. A pause. They don't need permission, he finished. They never did. No one argued. On Kethries, under a sky unfamiliar and kind, Jonah sat on the steps of a small modular home, watching Eris chase drifting motes of light through the evening air. Her laughter carried, clear, bright, unburdened. Cythera joined him, settling beside him. In Velari history, she said softly, there is a classification reserved for species that alter the course of civilizations without conquest. Jonah raised an eyebrow. Sounds ominous. It was meant to be a warning, she replied. And now? She looked at their child, at the settlement beyond, at the patchwork future taking shape around them. Now, she said, I believe it was a promise. Jonah was quiet for a moment. You know, he said finally, I never thought I'd matter this much. Cythera turned to him fully. You did not change the galaxy by force. He shrugged. Didn't feel like a choice. That, she said gently, is why it mattered. Years later, when Eris would ask about Earth, about storms and doors and fear, Jonah would tell her the truth, that the galaxy was vast and often cruel, that systems preferred silence over suffering they didn't want to see, and that sometimes the most dangerous thing a human could do was open a door. End.